Econet's announcement highlights Zimbabwe's currency challenges, marked by a perceived gap between the official exchange rate and the market value. The telecoms group says its ZiG-denominated share price does not reflect the company's underlying value, citing limited local currency liquidity that has curtailed trading. Econet plans to delist from the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange and spin off its infrastructure assets into a separate entity to be listed on the US dollar-based Victoria Falls Stock Exchange. The move could ease valuation concerns but may disadvantage minority shareholders.
The operations business is where the margin is. That's the high margin, high growth business. Towers or pipe companies are mainly low margin and they are very dependent on capex. So shareholders will be left with that option where you've got low margin, high capex business, and the high margin growth business is out of the way.
Analysts have urged minority shareholders to push for fair value ahead of an extraordinary general meeting where at least 75% approval is required for the delisting.
Firstly, they need to vote in the transaction, which I think now that it's now known in the public, I'm sure some of the big minority shareholders, who are the likes of Old Mutual, the likes of NASA, can start to lobby a cause for minorities to get a fair value in the transaction that's going to come through.
If approved, Econet would become the fifth company to exit the ZSE this year. Econet is not just a marquee counter on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange. It's the country's largest telco, mobile money operator, and one of the biggest employers in the country, making it a significantly important company in Zimbabwe's economy. As such, the effects of its dramatic corporate action are likely to reverberate across the capital markets and beyond.
Remember when they raised money on the ZSE in 1998? This was one of the beacons of indigenization. But that was right at the start of indigenization when black-owned businesses started getting into the space where white-owned capital was. So it is a dent to that legacy, the legacy where black-owned businesses carry the day, carry the capital markets.
The move is likely to deepen concerns over long-term appeal and credibility of the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Sebastian Gumbo is the Managing Director at Imara Edward Securities in Zimbabwe. He's joining us now live on the program tonight. Mr. Gumbo, thank you for your time this evening. Walk us through the rationale here for listing just the infrastructure, real estate and power assets, effectively Econet Infraco, but not the entire mobile telecommunications firm at the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange. Because if the board's argument is that it's being undervalued at the ZSE, would the entire company not get a better valuation at the Victoria Falls market?
So thank you for having me on the show. And I agree with the premise of the question. It certainly makes more sense to bring the entire entity onto the Victoria Falls Exchange. Ostensibly, the rationale for listing the Infraco by itself is because of what we've seen on the Zimbabwe markets and I guess on global markets as well, where spinning off subsidiaries and highly profitable subsidiaries sometimes unlocks shareholder value. But the fact that we're leaving out the large mobile network operator, the fintech businesses which are exhibiting the highest rates of growth, is a source of concern in terms of future valuation. To further compound the issues that we're facing, the fact that the towers business does not have a governing legislation around who the tenants will be, what the tariff structure will be. So there are a number of concerns that we've raised, and we hope the shareholders will also raise at the EGM for this transaction.
One of the other things the board said not too long ago is that, the company's undervaluation is limiting its ability to raise competitively priced debt. But looking at the half-year numbers, this is a company that has almost $700 million in secured US dollar debt on their books. Granted, it's pricey. Interest rates are between 11 and 14%. Do you expect that to be refinanced at a lower rate once the Infraco is listed?
So these are some of the issues that we would like to further explore with management as part of the deliberations around voting for this transaction. My view is the public markets are the most efficient manner for allocating capital. They wouldn't, I think, as a basic principle, provide the cheapest form of capital. And my concern is that with taking the company private, it might actually result in a higher cost of funding of that debt. We're aware that the founder and the principal shareholder is a global player and may be able to use some of those relationships to access cheaper debt. but the transparency, which has been of concern with other transactions that the company has consummated, will likely remain a concern.
And that also does raise the original question, right? Because if the, as you say, the principal shareholder has access to global capital markets, on paper, they should be able to tap into much cheaper sources of capital already without having to necessarily delist.
Correct. So our view is, yes, there are inefficiencies on the ZIG denominated board. Moving the entire entity to the Victoria Falls Exchange would result perhaps in a more fair valuation for the company's stock. Furthermore, reporting in US dollars would be, I think, the immediate low-hanging fruit that the company should explore. Because at present, the company continues to report in local currency, which is plagued with issues around, for example, the distortions between the official and the alternative exchange rates that are prevalent in the country at the moment. So there are a few other mechanisms that we feel could have resulted in the closure or the improvement in the pricing of those shares without resorting to a delisting.
One last question for you. In January, one of your analysts had an attractive rating on Econet Wireless. I know it's still relatively early in this entire transaction, but do you have a position on Econet Infraco?
Unfortunately, the information at hand is too scant. There isn't enough for us to come up with a valuation of that entity. We don't have any information, unfortunately, at this stage. And our hope is that as part of the transaction process, the company will issue a circular that will detail some of these pieces of information that we require to establish a fair value for the business.